A millionaire received a death sentence, 7 days. Instead of crying, he made a shocking proposal to his virgin maid. "Travel with me," he said without explaining the reason. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave your comment telling us where you are watching from. Raphael Velmont had never believed in miracles, but he had once believed in medicine. That faith died on a Tuesday evening in March 17 years ago, when his sister Clara was pronounced dead at 9:30 in the evening at St. Thomas's Hospital in London. She was 17 years old, 3 months pregnant, and the only person Raphael had ever truly loved. The official report stated cardiac arrest, following complications from an undiagnosed condition. The unofficial truth, whispered in corridors and buried under legal settlements, was negligence. A missed diagnosis? A delayed response? A nurse who may or may not have been paying attention when Clara's monitor began its desperate song. Raphael was 25 then, already groomed to inherit Velmont Energy, the largest independent power company in Britain. With holdings that stretched across Europe and into the Middle East, his father, Sir Edmund Velmont, had built an empire on the bones of coal mines and the promise of renewable futures. Raphael was meant to be the golden son, the face of a new generation of ethical capitalism. But when Clara died, something fundamental inside him cracked and then shattered completely. He stopped attending board meetings. He stopped returning calls. 6 months after her funeral, he stood in the car park of the very hospital where she had died, swallowed every pill he could find in his mother's medicine cabinet, and waited for the darkness to take him. It didn't. A woman found him slumped against his car, blue-lipped and barely breathing. She was wearing scrubs, her name badge turned backwards. She never called for help. She simply held him upright, forced her fingers down his throat and made him vomit until his body convulsed back to life. When the paramedics arrived, she was gone. Raphael woke 3 days later in a private room with no memory of her face, only the ghost of her voice saying, "Not yet. You don't get to leave yet." He never learned her name. He tried, of course, hired investigators, reviewed hospital schedules, combed through CCTV footage that mysteriously corrupted. Nothing. The woman who saved his life had vanished as though she had never existed at all. In time, Raphael convinced himself she had been an illusion, a fever dream conjured by a dying brain desperate for meaning. He went back to the company. He married briefly, divorced quietly, and built walls so high around himself that even his own reflection felt like a stranger. By the time he turned 42, Raphael Velmont was worth an estimated £4.7 billion. He owned a Georgian townhouse in Belgravia, a converted abbey in the Cotswolds, and a penthouse in Manchester that he visited twice a year for board meetings. He employed over 30 staff across his properties, most of whom he had never spoken to directly. His life was a series of contracts, conferences, and cold dinners, eaten alone in rooms designed to impress people he never invited. He did not believe in love. He believed in control, in silence, in the clean mathematics of profit and loss. He believed that grief was a luxury he could no longer afford. And then, 3 weeks ago, his body betrayed him. It started with exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. Then came the joint pain, the rashes that appeared and vanished without pattern, the fevers that spiked at night and left him shivering in sweat-soaked sheets. His private physician, Dr. Harrington, ran tests, then more tests, then called in specialists from Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was delivered in the sterile language of medical textbooks: a rare autoimmune disorder, aggressive and untreatable, attacking his organs with systematic precision. Without intervention, he had months. With intervention, perhaps a year. Most of it spent in hospitals connected to machines that would steal his dignity before they failed to save his life. Raphael asked the question that mattered. How long if I do nothing? Dr. Harrington looked at him for a long moment. 7 days, perhaps 8. Your kidneys are already failing. 7 days. Not enough time to make amends. Not enough time to build a legacy. Just enough time to choose how to spend the end. Most men in his position would have raged, wept, begged for experimental treatments and false hope. Raphael felt nothing but a strange, cold relief. He had been waiting to die since the night Clara's heart stopped, and now finally he had permission. He dismissed Dr. Harrington with a wire transfer large enough to fund a new research wing and a polite request to not contact him again. He cancelled his meetings, ignored his solicitor's increasingly frantic emails, and spent 2 days sitting in his study, staring at the portrait of Clara that hung above the fireplace. She was laughing in the painting, caught mid-motion at her 16th birthday party, her dark hair wild around her face. She had wanted to be a photographer. She had wanted to travel. She had wanted so many things that would never happen. On the 3rd day, Raphael made a decision that even he could not fully explain. He did not want to die alone in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and pity. He did not want his last moments witnessed by hired staff who would mourn professionally and move on to the next employer. He wanted something else, something he could not name. And so, with the clarity that sometimes comes to those who have nothing left to lose, he decided to choose who would be with him when the end came. Not a family member. Not a friend, because he had none. Not a lover, because love had been dead inside him for years. No, he chose someone who owed him nothing, who knew nothing about him, who existed in his orbit like a distant star, there but unreachable. He chose the girl who cleaned the east wing of his Belgravia house every Tuesday and Friday morning. Her name was Isadora. Raphael had never spoken to her directly, but he knew everything about her. He knew she was 26 years old, born in Hackney to a single mother who died of pneumonia when Isadora was 11. He knew she had been raised by her grandmother in a council flat in Tottenham, that she worked 3 jobs to keep the electricity on, and food in the cupboards. He knew she took the Northern Line to Embankment and walked the remaining distance to Belgravia, because she could not afford the bus fare. He knew she ate her lunch in the servants' corridor, always the same cheese sandwich wrapped in cling film, and that she had never once asked for a raise or complained about the impossible standards Mrs. Fletcher, the head of house, demanded. But more than these facts, Raphael knew something else, something that had obsessed him for the better part of 2 years. Isadora had a face that haunted him. Not because she was beautiful, though she was in that quiet, unguarded way that certain women possess before the world teaches them to perform beauty. No, it was something else. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she concentrated, it reminded him of someone. And 6 months ago, after hiring a private investigator to dig into her background, he learned why. Isadora's mother had been a nurse. Her name was Elena Santos, and she had worked at St. Thomas's Hospital during the time of Clara's death. More than that, she had been on duty the night Clara died. She had been the nurse assigned to Clara's ward. The same nurse mentioned, only briefly and then redacted, in the internal investigation report that Raphael's father had buried under a mountain of legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The same woman who, 5 years later, would save Raphael's life in a hospital car park. Raphael did not believe in coincidence. He believed in patterns, in hidden connections that only revealed themselves to those willing to look. And so 2 years ago, when Isadora applied for a cleaning position through an agency and was assigned to his household, Raphael had allowed it. He watched her. He studied her. He tried to understand if she knew, if her presence was a calculated revenge or an innocent accident of fate. But Isadora remained a mystery. She moved through his house like a ghost, leaving behind only the scent of lemon polish and the faint sound of her humming old songs he did not recognize. And now, with 7 days left, Raphael wanted her with him. Not for closure, not for confession, but because some part of him, the part that had died with Clara and been briefly resurrected by Isadora's mother, believed that this was always how it was meant to end. A closing of a circle, a payment of a debt he could neither name nor refuse. On a Thursday evening in late September, when the rain hammered against the windows of his Belgravia study and the city lights blurred into watercolor smears, Raphael sent for her. Mrs. Fletcher brought Isadora to the door with a disapproving frown, as though summoning a cleaner to the master's private rooms violated some unspoken hierarchy. Isadora stood in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed somewhere near Raphael's shoulder. She was wearing her work uniform, a plain grey dress that hung too loose on her frame, sensible black shoes, her dark hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful. "Mr. Velmont," she said quietly. Her voice was softer than he expected, with an accent that placed her firmly in North London, but with the careful grammar of someone who had worked hard to sand down the rougher edges. "Mrs. Fletcher said you wanted to see me. Have I done something wrong?" Raphael stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, studying her. Up close, the resemblance to her mother was even more striking. The same dark eyes, wary but direct, the same stubborn set to her mouth. But where Elena had carried herself with the confident exhaustion of someone who had seen too much, Isadora moved like prey, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. "How old are you, Isadora?" Raphael asked. She blinked. 26, sir. And you've worked here for 2 years." "Yes, sir." "In all that time, have I ever complained about your work?" "No, sir." "Then you've done nothing wrong." He turned from the window to face her fully. "I have a question to ask you, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you have anyone depending on you? Family, children, a partner?" Isadora's fingers tightened around each other. "My grandmother." "She's 78. "I pay her rent and help with her prescriptions. No one else?" "No, sir." Raphael nodded slowly. He crossed the room to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a single document. He placed it on the desk between them. "I'm going to make you an offer. You don't have to accept. If you refuse, nothing changes. You keep your job and we never speak of this again. But if you agree, your life will change in ways you cannot possibly imagine." Isadora did not move toward the desk. "What kind of offer?" "I'm dying," Raphael said simply. The words tasted strange in his mouth, too blunt and too true. "I have 7 days left, perhaps 8 if I'm unlucky. I want to travel. I want to see things I've never seen. And I don't want to do it alone." The room fell silent except for the rain and the distant sound of traffic on Belgrave Square. Isadora stared at him, her face carefully blank. "I'm sorry, Mr. Velmont, that's terrible news. I'm not looking for sympathy." He gestured to the document on the desk. "I'm proposing a transaction. Come with me for these 7 days. Be my companion. In exchange, I will pay off your grandmother's debts, set up a trust fund that will cover her care for the rest of her life, and give you a sum of money that will ensure you never have to clean another person's house again." Isadora's eyes widened slightly, but she did not reach for the paper. "Why me?" It was the right question, the only question that mattered. Raphael could have lied. He could have said she seemed kind or unobtrusive, or simply convenient. But something about the rain and the dying light, and the 7 days stretching before him like a prison sentence, made him reckless with the truth. "Because you remind me of someone," he said. "Someone I've been looking for." "I don't understand." "You don't need to. You only need to decide." He pushed the document toward her. "There's one condition. You cannot fall in love with me. I don't want tears or confessions or promises to remember me. I want companionship without attachment, presence without sentiment. Can you do that?" Isadora looked at the paper, then at Raphael, then back at the paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up and scanned the terms. He had made it generous to the point of obscenity. 1 week of her time in exchange for her grandmother's security and her own freedom. It was not a choice any rational person could refuse. But Isadora was not thinking rationally. She was thinking about her grandmother's cough that would not go away, about the mold creeping up the walls of their flat, about the electricity bill she had hidden in a drawer because she could not face the number. She was thinking about the years stretching ahead of her, an endless repetition of buses and mop buckets and invisible labor. And beneath all of that, buried so deep she barely recognized it, she was thinking about the strange, hollow ache she felt whenever she walked past Mr. Velmont in the hallways. Not attraction, not exactly, but something closer to recognition, as though they were both ghosts haunting the same house, circling each other in silence. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "where would we go?" "Anywhere, everywhere, does it matter?" "And you promise that after 7 days my grandmother will be taken care of?" "You have my word. The money will transfer regardless of what happens to me." Isadora set the paper down. She looked at Raphael for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something he could not name. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "All right, yes, I'll come." Raphael felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he could not identify. Relief? Triumph? Fear? He nodded once, sharp and businesslike. "We leave tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Pack light. Everything else you need will be provided." Isadora turned to leave but paused at the door. "Mr. Velmont?" "Yes? I'm sorry you're dying," she said. "I know you don't want sympathy, but I'm sorry anyway." Then she was gone, leaving Raphael alone in his study with the rain and the portrait of Clara and the terrible, exhilarating knowledge that he had just set something irreversible in motion. He looked down at his hands and noticed, for the first time in years, that they were shaking. Outside, the city hummed and glittered, indifferent to the bargains made in expensive houses by desperate men and desperate women. Tomorrow they would leave this rain-soaked corner of London and step into something neither of them could predict. Raphael had 7 days to find whatever he was looking for. Isadora had 7 days to discover what she had agreed to carry. Neither of them knew yet that the past was not done with them, that Elena Santos had left behind more than a daughter and a mystery, that some debts could only be paid in truth and blood and the kind of love that breaks you open before it sets you free. But they would learn. They would learn. The private jet left. London City Airport at precisely 6 in the morning, cutting through the grey dawn like a blade. Isadora had never been on a plane before. She sat in a leather seat that cost more than 3 months of her salary, her hands gripping the armrests as the ground fell away beneath them and the city became a grid of lights and shadows. Raphael sat across from her, reading something on a tablet, his face unreadable. He had not spoken to her since she arrived at the airfield, shepherded by a driver who treated her with the polite confusion reserved for people who do not quite fit into any recognizable category. She was not family. She was not staff. She was not a mistress, at least not in any way that made sense. She was simply there, occupying space in Raphael Velmont's carefully controlled world, and no one seemed to know what to do with that information. The flight attendant brought coffee in delicate china cups and pastries Isadora did not recognize. She ate one carefully, hyper-aware of crumbs, of sounds, of the way Raphael occasionally looked up from his tablet to observe her. Not with interest exactly, more like a scientist watching a specimen adapt to new conditions. When she caught his eye, he did not look away. "Have you ever left England before?" he asked. "No, sir." "You can drop the sir. We're not in the house anymore." Isadora nodded but said nothing. The title felt like armor. Without it, she did not know how to address this man who held the next 7 days of her life in his hands. Raphael seemed to sense her discomfort because he returned to his tablet without pressing the point. 3 hours later, they landed in Reykjavik. Iceland was nothing like Isadora had imagined. The landscape was stark and alien, all black volcanic rock and patches of moss that glowed an impossible green against the grey sky. The air tasted clean and cold like metal and water. Raphael had arranged for a car to take them north, away from the city, into the raw emptiness of the highlands. They drove for hours in silence, the road unwinding through valleys that looked like the surface of the moon. Isadora pressed her face to the window, trying to absorb it all. The waterfalls that appeared without warning, the horses that watched them pass with ancient, indifferent eyes, the mountains that rose like broken teeth against the horizon. Raphael watched her watching the world. He had chosen Iceland deliberately, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it was a place where you could feel the earth breathing, where the line between life and death felt thinner. The glaciers here were melting, disappearing degree by degree, year by year. He wanted to see them before they were gone. Before he was gone, there was a symmetry to it that pleased the part of his mind that still craved order. They arrived at their accommodation just as the light began to shift into that strange Icelandic dusk that lasted for hours. It was not a hotel but a private lodge built into the side of a hill, all glass and dark wood, designed to disappear into the landscape. Inside it was warm and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the valley below like a living painting. A fire had already been lit. Food had been prepared and left in the kitchen. There were no staff, no other guests. Just the two of them and the silence. Raphael showed Isadora to her room without ceremony. It was beautiful in that austere, expensive way. White linens, a view of nothing but rock and sky, a bathroom with a tub carved from a single piece of stone. He left her there with instructions to rest, to explore, to do whatever she wished. He did not say where he would be. Isadora stood in the center of the room for a long time after he left, trying to understand what was happening to her. 24 hours ago, She had been scrubbing floors in Belgravia, her world mapped out in bus routes and work shifts. Now she was standing in Iceland, in a house that cost more per night than she earned in a year, bound to a dying man by a contract she still did not fully understand. She should have felt grateful. She should have felt lucky. Instead, she felt unmoored, as though she had stepped off the edge of the world and had not yet begun to fall. She unpacked the small bag she had brought, a few changes of clothes, her mother's old cardigan that she could not bring herself to throw away, her battered paperback she never had time to read. Then she opened the wardrobe and found it full of new clothes, all in her size. Cashmere sweaters, wool trousers, a down jacket that weighed almost nothing. Everything plain, expensive, chosen by someone who understood exactly what she would need, but had never asked what she might want. For it should have felt like generosity. Instead, it felt like erasure. That first night they ate dinner in silence at opposite ends of a long wooden table. Raphael had prepared the meal himself. Roasted lamb, root vegetables, bread that tasted like smoke. Isadora ate mechanically, hyper-aware of every sound she made, every glance Raphael cast in her direction. He did not ask her questions. He did not make small talk. He simply ate and occasionally refilled her glass with wine she barely touched. When the meal was over, he stood and said, "I'm going for a walk. You're welcome to join me or stay here. The choice is yours." Isadora should have stayed, should have gone to her room, locked the door, counted the days until this strange bargain was over. But something in the way he said it, the complete absence of expectation, made her stand and follow him outside. The night was cold and crystalline, the sky crowded with stars she had never seen in London's light-polluted haze. Raphael walked without speaking, his hands in his pockets, his breath misting in the air. They followed a path that led up the hillside, away from the lodge into the raw emptiness of the highlands. Isadora struggled to keep up, her lungs burning in the thin, cold air. But she did not ask him to slow down. She simply pushed herself harder, determined not to be left behind. They reached the top of the hill and Raphael stopped. Below them, the valley spread out in shades of black and silver, the distant mountains sharp against the star-scattered sky. And then, without warning, the sky itself began to move. Green light rippled across the darkness, ribbons of luminescence that twisted and pulsed like something alive. Isadora had seen photographs of the northern lights, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it, the way the light seemed to breathe, the way it made the world below feel insignificant and holy at the same time. "Aurora borealis," Raphael said quietly. "Solar winds hitting the magnetosphere. Particles colliding, releasing energy as light. It's just physics. It's beautiful," Isadora whispered. Raphael glanced at her, something unreadable crossing his face. "Yes, it is." They stood there for a long time watching the lights dance, and then Raphael did something that shocked them both. He held out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Isadora stared at him. "There's no music. Does it matter?" She should have refused, should have stepped away from this man who was simultaneously her employer, her benefactor, and an increasingly uncomfortable mystery. But the lights were moving above them, and the world felt like it had paused, and something in Raphael's face, a vulnerability he could not quite hide, made her take his hand. His palm was warm against hers, calloused in unexpected places. He pulled her close, one hand at her waist, and began to move. It was not a dance, not really. More like a slow rotation, their feet crunching in the frost-hardened grass, their breath mingling in the cold air. Isadora could feel the heat of him through her jacket, could smell something clean and expensive, cedar maybe, and something darker. She kept her eyes on his shoulder, afraid to look up, afraid of what she might see in his face. But Raphael was looking at her. For the first time since she had stepped into his study 2 days ago, he was truly seeing her, not as a cleaner, not as a ghost, not as the daughter of a woman he had spent years trying to understand, just as Isadora, young and uncertain and impossibly brave for agreeing to this strange bargain. And for reasons he could not articulate, he smiled. Not the cold professional smile he gave to board members and journalists. A real smile, small and surprised, as though his face had forgotten how to make the shape. Isadora felt him smile before she saw it. She looked up, her heart hammering in her chest, and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not desire exactly. Something more complicated, something that looked almost like grief. "Why did you really ask me to come with you?" she asked quietly. The smile faded. Raphael did not answer immediately. They continued to move in their slow, awkward circle, the lights flickering above them. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because you're the only person in the world who owes me nothing." And I needed to remember what that felt like. It was not the truth. Or rather, it was only part of the truth. But it was the only answer he could give without unraveling everything. Isadora nodded as though it made sense, as though she understood. But her hand tightened in his, and they danced until the lights began to fade and the cold drove them back to the warmth of the lodge. That night, Isadora lay awake in her expensive bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened on the hill, Raphael's hand in hers. The way he had looked at her, as though she were both the answer and the question. The strange, frightening pull she felt toward this man who was dying, who had hired her for reasons he refused to explain, who moved through the world like a wound that had never properly healed. She thought about her grandmother, safe now because of Raphael's money. She thought about the 7 days stretching ahead of her, each one bringing them closer to an ending she could not imagine. And she thought about her mother, Elena, who had died with secrets Isadora had never thought to question. Her mother had been a nurse, had worked impossible hours, had come home exhausted and silent. She had never talked about her patients, never brought her work home. But sometimes late at night, Isadora would wake to the sound of her mother crying in the next room. And she would know that something terrible had happened at the hospital. After her mother died, Isadora had found a box of things in the back of a closet. Letters, photographs, newspaper clippings. Most of it made no sense to an 11-year-old girl drowning in grief. But there was one photograph she remembered clearly, her mother standing outside St. Thomas's Hospital, young and unsmiling, her arms crossed over her chest. And on the back, in her mother's handwriting, "Some mistakes you can never fix." Isadora had not thought about that photograph in years. But now, lying in this strange bed in this strange country, she found herself wondering what her mother had meant. What mistake? What had Elena Santos done or failed to do that haunted her enough to write those words? She did not know. But the question followed her into uneasy dreams, where her mother's face kept shifting into Raphael's, and the lights in the sky were not green but red. And somewhere a girl was screaming in a hospital corridor, and no one was coming to help. The next morning, Raphael was already awake when Isadora emerged from her room. He was standing at the window, coffee in hand, staring out at the landscape, with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing it. He looked worse than he had the day before, paler, thinner, the shadows under his eyes darker. The disease was working fast. "We're going to the glacier today," he said without turning around. "Vatnajökull. It's the largest ice cap in Europe. I want to see it before it's gone." They drove south for hours, the landscape shifting from black volcanic plains to fields of ice that stretched to the horizon. The glacier appeared gradually, a vast white emptiness that hurt to look at, beautiful and terrible in its indifference. Raphael had arranged for a guide to take them onto the ice itself, a weathered woman in her 50s named Sigrid, who spoke in clipped, efficient English and looked at Raphael with the particular sympathy reserved for those who are clearly dying. They walked across the glacier in crampons, their footsteps crunching on ice that was thousands of years old. Sigrid pointed out crevasses and ice caves, explained the science of glacial formation and melt rates. Raphael listened intently, asking questions, touching the ice with bare hands despite the cold. Isadora followed behind, overwhelmed by the scale of it, by the knowledge that all of this was disappearing, melting into the sea degree by degree. At one point, they stopped at the edge of a massive crevasse, its walls glowing blue in the filtered light. Raphael stood at the very edge, looking down into the darkness, and Isadora felt a sudden, irrational fear that he was going to jump. She stepped forward without thinking and grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said. Raphael looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "I wasn't going to. I just wanted to see how deep it goes. It's not safe." "Nothing is." But he stepped back from the edge anyway, allowing Isadora to pull him to safer ground. Sigrid watched the exchange with raised eyebrows but said nothing. That night, back at the lodge, Raphael cooked again, this time a simple pasta with vegetables and herbs he had bought at a roadside farm stand. They ate in the same charged silence, but something had shifted. Isadora no longer felt like a specimen being observed. She felt like a participant in something, though she could not have said what. After dinner, Raphael disappeared into his room and returned with a stack of papers. He handed them to Isadora without explanation. "What is this?" she asked. "Letters. I've been writing one every morning since we left London. To be opened after I'm gone." Isadora stared at the papers in her hands. They were sealed in individual envelopes, each one dated. "Why are you giving these to me?" "Because you're the only one who'll read them without judgment. I don't expect you to understand everything. I don't expect you to forgive. Me, I just need someone to know." "Know what?" Raphael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "That I tried. That at the end I tried to do something that wasn't calculated or cruel. I tried to be honest." Isadora wanted to open one of the letters right then, wanted to understand what this man was confessing to, but something in his face stopped her. Instead, she set the letters aside and asked the question that had been building in her since they danced under the northern lights. "Did you know my mother?" The silence that followed was so complete that Isadora could hear her own heartbeat. Raphael's face went perfectly still, a mask snapping into place. When he spoke, his voice was flat. "Why do you ask?" "Because you look at me like I'm someone else, like I remind you of someone. And you said I was the person you'd been looking for." She paused, gathering courage. "My mother was a nurse. She worked at St. Thomas's Hospital. She died when I was 11. And sometimes I wonder if—" "Yes," Raphael said. The word fell between them like a stone. "I knew your mother. She saved my life." Isadora felt the floor tilt beneath her. "When?" 17 years ago. "I tried to kill myself in a hospital car park. Your mother found me. She never called for help, just saved me herself. Then she disappeared. I looked for her for years. I never found her." He paused, his jaw tight. "And then 2 years ago you walked into my house and I saw her face in yours. So this—" Isadora gestured around the room, at the impossible luxury, at the strange bargain they had made. "This was never random. You knew who I was." "Yes. And you've been watching me, studying me, for 2 years." "Yes." Isadora stood, her hands shaking. "Why? Why didn't you just tell me?" "Why this elaborate game?" Raphael stood as well, his face hard. "Because I needed to understand something. I needed to know if you were like her, if you had her kindness, her strength, or if—" He stopped himself, jaw clenched. "Or if what?" "It doesn't matter now." But it did matter. Isadora could feel it, a secret so large it filled the room, pressed against the walls. She thought about her mother's photograph, the words scrawled on the back. "Some mistakes you can never fix." She thought about Raphael's obsession, his careful observation, the way he looked at her sometimes with something that was not quite hatred, but was definitely not love. "What did my mother do?" Isadora asked quietly. "What mistake did she make that you can't forgive?" Raphael turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. "Not tonight. I won't do this tonight." "Then when?" "When I'm ready to lose you." The words hung in the air, raw and honest. Isadora felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been closed and safe for so long, she had forgotten it was there. She wanted to push him, to demand answers, to understand why this dying man had chosen her for his final days. But something in his voice, a desperation he could not quite hide, made her stop. "All right," she said quietly. "Not tonight." Raphael nodded once, sharp and grateful. Then he left the room, left her standing alone with a stack of letters and a truth that was only half revealed. Isadora sat back down at the table and picked up the first letter. It was dated the morning they left London. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the promise of answers. But she did not open it. Not yet. Instead, she went to her room and pulled out the old cardigan that had belonged to her mother. It still smelled faintly of the lavender soap Elena had loved, mixed with the antiseptic scent of hospitals that never quite washed out. Isadora buried her face in the wool and tried to remember her mother's voice, her mother's hands. Anything that might explain why Raphael Valmont looked at her like she was both a salvation and a curse. Outside, the wind picked up, howling across the empty highlands, and somewhere in the house Raphael sat alone in the dark, counting down the days he had left and wondering if honesty would save him or destroy them both. 3 days remained. The glacier was melting, and neither of them knew yet that the truth, when it finally came, would be colder and more unforgiving than any winter they had ever known. They left Iceland on the 4th morning, when the light had that particular quality of autumn turning toward winter. Pale and thin as old silver, Raphael woke Isadora before dawn with a quiet knock on her door and a single word: Morocco. She packed quickly, her hands moving on autopilot, her mind still tangled in the revelations of the previous night. Raphael knew her mother, had been searching for her mother, had hired Isadora knowing exactly who she was, watching her for 2 years like a puzzle he could not solve. The knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone, heavy and cold. On the flight south, Raphael slept fitfully in the leather seat across from her, his face grey with exhaustion. Isadora watched him when she thought he could not see, noting the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for water, the way his breathing had become shallower, more labored. The disease was accelerating. She could see it in the sharp angles of his face, the bruises that bloomed too easily on his skin, the way he moved as though every joint ached. 4 days ago he had been merely pale. Now he looked like a man being slowly erased. She wanted to feel nothing. Wanted to maintain the professional distance of their arrangement. 7 days, a transaction, nothing more. But something had shifted in her on that frozen hillside under the dancing lights, when Raphael had smiled at her, like a man remembering how to be human. And now, watching him sleep with his defenses down, his face softened by vulnerability, she felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Not love. She would not allow herself that. But something adjacent to it. Something that made her want to reach across the narrow aisle and touch his hand, just to let him know he was not alone. She did not. Instead, she opened her mother's cardigan and found tucked into the pocket something she had not noticed before, a small photograph, creased and faded. It showed her mother as a young woman, perhaps 25, standing outside a church Isadora did not recognize. Eleanor was smiling in the photograph, but it was a sad smile, the kind that suggested loss rather than joy. And in the corner, written in her mother's distinctive handwriting, was a date, March 15th, 2008, the day Clara Velmont died. Isadora's hands began to shake. She turned the photograph over and found more writing, so small she had to squint to read it. Forgive me. I tried, God knows I tried. The words blurred as Isadora's eyes filled with tears. What had her mother tried to do? What had gone so wrong that 17 years later, a dying billionaire would track down her daughter and bind her to him for 7 mysterious days? The questions multiplied in her mind, each one branching into a dozen more, until she felt like she was drowning in unknowns. When Raphael woke, his eyes found hers immediately, sharp despite his exhaustion. You've been crying. It was not a question. Isadora wiped her face quickly, embarrassed to be caught. I found something. In my mother's cardigan. She handed him the photograph. Raphael took it carefully, his face going very still as he studied the image. When he looked up, something haunted moved behind his eyes. Where did you get this? Chelsea, it was in the pocket. I never noticed it before. She paused. That date, that's when your sister died, isn't it? Raphael's jaw tightened. Yes. Why would my mother have a photograph from that day? Why would she write that she was sorry? Because she was there. Raphael handed the photograph back to her, his movements precise, controlled. Your mother was the nurse assigned to Clara's ward the night she died. She was the one who found her when... He stopped, swallowing hard. When everything went wrong. Isadora felt the cabin tilt around her. What do you mean everything went wrong? Clara had an undiagnosed heart condition. She was pregnant, though no one knew that until the autopsy. She went into cardiac arrest at 9 o'clock. By the time anyone responded, it was too late. Raphael's voice was flat, clinical, as though he were reading from a medical report. The investigation found multiple failures in protocol, delayed response time, missed warning signs. Your mother was mentioned in the report briefly, then the whole thing was buried. By whom? My father. He paid everyone off. The hospital, the investigators, the families of the staff involved. He made it all disappear because a scandal would have been bad for business. Raphael's hands clenched into fists on his lap. But I kept copies. I read them until I had every word memorized. I needed to understand how someone could fail so completely, How a 17-year-old girl could die from negligence in one of the best hospitals in London. Isadora's throat felt tight. And you blamed my mother. For a long time, yes. Raphael looked out the window at the clouds below, his expression unreadable. I blamed everyone. The doctors who missed the diagnosis, the nurses who didn't respond fast enough, my father for covering it up, myself for not being there. But your mother, she was the one I fixated on, because she was there at the end, because she was the last person to see Clara alive. And because, he stopped, his voice cracking slightly, because what? Because 5 years later she saved my life. And I couldn't understand why she would care about a stranger in a car park when she had failed my sister so completely. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. The plane began its descent into Marrakesh, the Atlas Mountains rising in the distance like broken teeth. Isadora stared at the photograph in her hands, at her mother's sad smile and desperate words. Forgive me, I tried. A terrible understanding was beginning to form in her mind, a shape she did not want to acknowledge. You think my mother killed your sister, she said quietly. Raphael turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of something raw and complicated. No, not anymore, but I thought it for years. I was obsessed with it. And when you walked into my house 2 years ago, I saw it as a sign. A chance to understand. A chance to... He stopped himself, shaking his head. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I was wrong. About so many things. What changed your mind? You did. Raphael held her gaze, unflinching, watching you for 2 years, seeing how you move through the world with such careful dignity, how you take care of your grandmother, even when it means you have nothing left for yourself, how you never complain, never ask for more than you're given. You're nothing like I expected. And I realized your mother must have been the same. She must have been doing her best in an impossible situation, just like you. Isadora did not know what to say. The words felt too large, too honest for the narrow confines of the plane. So she simply folded the photograph carefully and tucked it back into her mother's cardigan, along with all the questions she still could not answer. Morocco swallowed them whole. The heat was immediate and shocking after the cold clarity of Iceland, thick and spice-scented, pressing against Isadora's skin like a living thing. Raphael had rented a private riad in the heart of the Marrakech Medina, a traditional house built around a central courtyard, with a fountain and orange trees, and walls covered in intricate zeligi tilework that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. It was beautiful in a way that made Isadora's chest ache. Too beautiful, too perfect, a kind of luxury that felt almost aggressive in its opulence. Their rooms opened onto the courtyard, separated by nothing but carved wooden screens that filtered the light into patterns of shadow and gold. Isadora could hear Raphael moving around in his space, could hear the quiet sounds of him trying to get comfortable, of him struggling with something as simple as removing his shoes. The disease was taking more from him every hour. She wanted to help. She did not know if she was allowed. That evening they walked through the souks together, navigating the narrow alleyways crowded with vendors selling spices and leather and metalwork that caught the light like captured stars. Raphael moved slowly, one hand occasionally bracing against a wall when the crowd pressed too close. Isadora stayed near him, ready to catch him if he stumbled, though she pretended not to notice his weakness. She understood instinctively that he would hate to be pitied. They stopped at a stall selling old books and manuscripts, and Raphael picked up a worn volume bound in cracked leather. He opened it carefully, running his fingers over the Arabic script, and something in his face softened. "Can you read it?" Isadora asked. Some. Clara was better. She was studying Middle Eastern history at university. She wanted to be an archaeologist, dig up lost cities in the desert. He smiled, but it was sad. She would have loved this place. "Tell me about her," Isadora said quietly. "Not how she died. How she lived." Raphael looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing whether she deserved this trust. Then he closed the book and bought it, tucking it under his arm as they continued walking. "She was loud," he said finally. "That's the first thing I remember about Clara. She was always laughing or singing or arguing about something. She had opinions about everything: politics, music, which biscuits were acceptable to serve with tea. She drove our parents mad because she refused to behave like a proper Velmont daughter. She wore ripped jeans to charity galas and dyed her hair blue when she was 15. She dated unsuitable boys and wrote angry poems about capitalism and climate change. His voice grew softer. She was also the kindest person I've ever known. She volunteered at homeless shelters. She stood up for anyone being bullied. She once spent her entire birthday money buying winter coats for rough sleepers in Victoria Station. She sounds wonderful, Isadora said. She was, and she was also reckless and stubborn and far too trusting. She fell in love with a boy our parents hated, some musician from Brixton with tattoos and no prospects. They forbade her from seeing him. So naturally, she snuck out every night to be with him. Raphael's jaw tightened. She was 3 months pregnant when she died. She hadn't told anyone. The autopsy revealed it. And I've spent 17 years wondering if she was scared, if she needed help, if she died thinking we would all hate her for getting pregnant out of wedlock. Isadora felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sure she knew you loved her. Sisters always know, do they? Raphael stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Because I never told her, not once. I was too busy being the responsible older brother, the heir who did everything right. I judged her choices. I lectured her about responsibility. And the last conversation we had, I told her she was being childish and that she needed to grow up. His voice cracked. Those were the last words I ever said to my sister. Grow up. And 3 days later she was dead. Isadora reached out without thinking and took his hand. Raphael looked down at their joined hands, as though surprised to find them connected. Then slowly his fingers tightened around hers. She knew you loved her, Isadora said firmly. Siblings fight. It's what they do. But she knew. You can't possibly know that. Yes, I can, because I had a mother who worked herself to death and rarely had time for me, who was always exhausted, always worried, always somewhere else in her mind, and I was angry at her for it. I thought she cared more about her patients than she cared about me. We fought the week before she died. I told her I wished she would just quit her stupid job and be a normal mother. Isadora's voice broke. And then she got pneumonia and died, and those words haunted me for years. But eventually I realized something. She knew I loved her. Beneath the anger and the childish hurt, she knew. Just like Clara knew you loved her. Because love isn't about perfect last words. It's about everything that came before. Raphael stared at her, something raw and exposed in his face. Then, without warning, he pulled her close and wrapped his arms around her. It was not a romantic embrace. It was the desperate grip of a drowning man finding something solid to hold on to. Isadora felt his body shaking against hers, felt the heat of him through the thin cotton of his shirt, felt the terrible fragility of him. She held him back, there in the middle of the crowded souk with people flowing around them like water around stones. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "For what?" "For lying to make me feel better." "I'm not lying." "Yes, you are. But I'm grateful anyway." They walked back to the riad in silence, still holding hands, and Isadora realized with a shock that she had forgotten about their arrangement, about the 7 days and the money and the careful boundaries she was supposed to maintain. She had forgotten to protect herself, and that forgetting felt like the most dangerous thing she had ever done. That night Isadora could not sleep. The heat was oppressive despite the fountain's steady splash, and her mind would not stop circling the pieces of the puzzle that was Raphael Velmont. She kept thinking about her mother's photograph, about Clara's death, about the guilt that Raphael carried like a physical weight. And she kept thinking about the way he had held her in the souk, as though she were the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling beneath him. She got up and went to the courtyard, hoping the air would be cooler. Raphael was already there, sitting on the edge of the fountain with his feet in the water, staring up at the square of stars visible between the riad's high walls. He did not turn when she approached, but he shifted slightly, making room for her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too hot, you." "I don't sleep much anymore. Side effect of dying." He said it lightly, but there was an edge to his voice. Isadora sat beside him and slipped her own feet into the water. It was cold, almost shocking against her skin. "How much time do you have left?" The doctor said 7 days. "It's been 4. So 3, maybe 4 if I'm unlucky." "And you're sure?" "There's no treatment." "I'm sure." Raphael looked at her then, his face half in shadow. "You don't need to worry about me. That's not what I hired you for." "What did you hire me for exactly?" "You've never actually said." Raphael was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Initially, I wanted to understand you, to see if you were guilty by association, if your mother's failure had somehow shaped you into someone careless or cruel. I wanted to punish you, I think, in some abstract way. Make you watch me die and know that your bloodline had killed someone I loved. Isadora felt the words like a physical blow. That's monstrous. Yes, it is. Raphael did not look away from her. But then I met you. Really met you, not just observed you from a distance. And I realized you were nothing like the monster I'd built in my mind. You were just a girl trying to survive in a world that's never been kind to you. And my revenge fantasy started to feel hollow and pathetic. He paused. So I changed the terms in my head. I decided I wanted to give you something. Experiences you'd never have otherwise. Beauty and luxury and freedom, even if it was only for 7 days. I told myself it was penance, a way to balance the scales before I died. And now, Raphael reached into the water and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers beneath the surface. Now I don't know what this is. I don't know what I want from you, or what I'm allowed to want. I only know that when I'm with you, the dying feels less heavy. And that's more than I've felt in 17 years. Isadora's heart was hammering in her chest. She knew she should pull her hand away, should remind him of the boundaries they had agreed to. No falling in love, no attachment. But the water was cool and his hand was warm, and the stars above them were so bright they made her dizzy. I'm not supposed to fall in love with you, she said quietly. No, Raphael agreed. You're not. But I think I might be doing it anyway. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Raphael's hand tightened around hers almost painfully. When he spoke, his voice was raw. Don't, please, it will only hurt more when I'm gone. Maybe, but you don't get to decide what I feel. That was never part of our contract. Raphael laughed, a broken sound. You're right. I'm a fool to think I could control any of this. I've spent my entire life trying to control outcomes, minimize risk, predict every variable. And here I am, dying in Morocco with a woman I barely know, feeling things I have no right to feel. What things? He did not answer with words. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, as though he expected her to pull away. But Isadora did not pull away. She kissed him back, her free hand coming up to cup his face, feeling the sharp line of his jaw, the heat of his skin. The kiss deepened, became something desperate and hungry, years of loneliness pouring into it from both sides. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Raphael rested his forehead against hers. We can't do this. It's not fair to you. Nothing about this has been fair. But I'm still here. Isadora, don't try to protect me or make decisions for me. I'm a grown woman. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because I don't. I have no idea what I'm doing. I only know that I want you so badly it terrifies me. And I have 3 days left. 3 days to fuck this up completely, or... He stopped, shaking his head. Or what? Or find something worth dying for. The words hit Isadora like a physical force. She pulled back slightly, searching his face in the dim light. I'm not worth dying for. I'm just a cleaner from Tottenham who got lucky. You're so much more than that. Raphael's hand came up to trace the line of her cheek, gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. You're brave and kind and so fucking strong it breaks my heart. You take care of everyone around you even when you have nothing left for yourself. You carry your mother's memory like a sacred thing, even though she left you with more questions than answers. You agreed to spend 7 days with a dying stranger because it would save your grandmother. Do you know how rare that is? How extraordinary? Isadora felt tears sliding down her face. You don't know me. Not really. You've watched me, but you don't know what's inside. I'm not brave. I'm terrified all the time. Of being alone, of ending up like my mother, of never being enough. Then we're the same, Raphael said softly. Because I've been terrified since the day Clara died. Terrified that her death was meaningless, that my life has been meaningless, that I'll die without ever having really lived. He kissed her again, softer this time. But with you for these few days I feel alive, really alive, for the first time since I was 25 years old. They stayed by the fountain until the sky began to lighten, holding each other in the warm Moroccan night, not speaking, just existing together in the fragile space between what they wanted and what they knew was coming. When the call to prayer echoed across the city, Raphael stood carefully and offered Isadora his hand. Come to bed with me, he said. Not for sex. I can't, not yet. I just want to hold you. I want to fall asleep knowing you're there. Can I have that? Isadora took his hand and let him lead her to his room. They lay down together on the low bed, still fully clothed, and Raphael wrapped himself around her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Isadora felt his heartbeat against her back, irregular and too fast, and knew that time was running out faster than either of them wanted to admit. Tell me about your mother, Raphael murmured into her hair. Not the nurse. The person. What was she like? And so Isadora talked. She told him about how Elena sang when she cooked, old Portuguese songs from her own childhood, how she always smelled like lavender and antiseptic, how she would come home from night shifts and still find the energy to help Isadora with her homework, even when her hands were shaking with exhaustion. How she never complained, never explained why she worked so hard, never talked about Isadora's father or the family she had left behind in Portugal to come to England, how she had died too young, too tired, too worn down by a world that took everything and gave so little back. She sounds like she loved you very much, Raphael said when Isadora finally fell silent. I think she did, in her way. But I also think she was carrying something heavy, some secret that made her sad even when she was smiling, and I never knew what it was. Maybe it was Clara, Raphael said quietly. Maybe she blamed herself for what happened, even though it wasn't her fault. Maybe she spent years trying to make up for something that was never hers to fix. Is that what you really believe? Raphael was quiet for so long that Isadora thought he had fallen asleep. Then he said very softly, I want to believe it. Because the alternative, that your mother was guilty, that she failed through negligence or indifference, means I've wasted 17 years hating someone who didn't deserve it. And I can't carry that into whatever comes next. What if I told you it doesn't matter? Isadora turned in his arms to face him. What if I told you that whether my mother was guilty or innocent, whether she made a mistake or did everything right, it doesn't change what you and I have found in these 4 days? Would that be enough? Raphael looked at her with such naked longing that Isadora felt her breath catch. I don't know. I want it to be. But I've spent so long being angry, being certain of my narrative that I don't know who I am without it. Then maybe these last days are about finding out. She kissed him gently. Maybe you get to choose who you are at the end. Not the Raphael who lost his sister. Not the Raphael who built an empire. Just Raphael. Human and flawed in here. I'm not sure I know how to do that. Then we'll figure it out together. For as long as we have. They fell asleep as the sun rose over Marrakech, tangled together in a bed that smelled of orange blossoms and time running out. And outside, the city woke and moved and continued on, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding in the Riyadh's cool. Shadows, 2 days remained, the truth was circling closer, and neither of them knew yet that the final revelation would shatter everything they thought. They understood about guilt and forgiveness and the complicated mathematics. Of love, they left Morocco on the 6th morning, and Raphael could barely stand. Isadora watched him struggle with his luggage, watched him brace himself against walls and door frames, watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a watercolor left in the rain. She wanted to help, but knew he would refuse. So she stayed close, ready to catch him if he fell, her heart beating a terrified rhythm against her ribs. The flight to their final destination was the longest yet. 8 hours to Japan, to a remote mountain village in the Japanese Alps that Raphael had visited once, years ago when he still believed in beauty for its own sake. He slept through most of the journey, his breathing shallow and irregular, and Isadora held his hand the entire time, feeling his pulse flutter against her fingertips like a trapped bird. She had opened 3 of his letters during the flight. The first was dated the morning they left London and contained a single sentence. I am doing this because I no longer know how to be human without help. The second, written in Iceland, was longer. You dance like someone who has never been allowed to take up space. I want to give you a world where you can be as large as you truly are. The third, from Morocco, made her cry, I am falling in love with you. And it is the worst possible timing, and I am not sorry. When they landed in Tokyo and transferred to a smaller plane that took them north into the mountains, Raphael woke briefly and looked at her with eyes that seemed to see through to her bones. Are you afraid? He asked. Yes, Isadora answered honestly. Of me dying. Of you dying before I get to know all of you. She squeezed his hand. Of losing something I only just found. Raphael's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. I wrote you something. For after. It's in the box I gave you back in London. The wooden one with the brass lock. I haven't opened it. Good, don't, not yet. He closed his eyes again. Promise me something. Anything. Whatever you find in there, whatever I've written, whatever I've left you, promise me you'll try to understand. Promise me you'll remember that I was broken long before I met you, and that you're not responsible for fixing me. Isadora felt ice spread through her chest. What are you telling me, Raphael? But he had slipped back into sleep, or something that looked like it, and would not answer. The ryokan was ancient and perfect, a traditional inn nestled in a valley between mountains so steep they seemed to fold the sky in half. It was late autumn, and the maples were burning red and gold, their leaves falling like embers onto paths of raked gravel. Their room was spare and beautiful. Tatami mats, sliding shoji screens, a low table with a single branch of cherry blossoms in a ceramic vase. Through the window, Isadora could see a private onsen, steam rising from the mineral-heated water into the cold mountain air. Raphael had requested this place specifically, had arranged for complete privacy, for meals to be left outside their door, for no staff to disturb them. They were alone here, truly alone, perhaps for the first time since this strange journey began, and Isadora could feel the weight of that solitude pressing against them, intimate and terrifying. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of blood and copper, Raphael asked her to help him bathe. He could not manage it alone anymore. His hands shook too badly, his legs would not hold him. It was the first time he had admitted weakness so plainly, and Isadora understood what it cost him. She helped him undress, her fingers careful on buttons and fabric, trying not to react to the landscape of his body, the sharp jut of ribs, the bruises that mapped his skin like dark continents, the way he had become more skeleton than man in less than a week. He did not look away from her face as she worked, and she did not look away from his. There was something sacred in the exchange, a kind of honesty that required witnesses. They moved to the onsen together, Isadora wearing a simple cotton robe, Raphael naked and unashamed despite his deterioration. The water was almost too hot, sulphurous and mineral-rich, and Raphael sank into it with a sound that was half relief, half pain. Isadora slipped in beside him, the robe clinging to her skin, and for a long time they simply sat in the steam, not speaking, not touching, just existing together in the last light of day. "Tell me what really happened to Clara," Isadora said finally. "All of it. No more pieces. I need to understand." Raphael was quiet for so long that she thought he might refuse. Then he took a breath that rattled in his chest and began to speak. Clara came to the hospital on her own that night. She'd been having chest pains for days, but was too afraid to tell our parents because she knew they'd find out about the pregnancy. She took a taxi to St. Thomas's and checked herself in through emergency. She was terrified, alone, 17 years old. His voice cracked. By the time they got her to a ward and ran preliminary tests, her heart was already failing. The pregnancy had exacerbated an undiagnosed congenital condition. She needed immediate surgery, but she was deteriorating fast. And my mother was her nurse. Yes, Elena was assigned to Clara's ward for the night shift. According to the reports, she did everything by the book. Monitored vitals, called for the doctor when Clara's numbers started dropping, prepared her for emergency transport to surgery. Raphael's hands clenched beneath the water. But there was a delay. The surgical team was handling another emergency. Clara's condition worsened, and at some point, the reports are unclear about this, Clara went into full cardiac arrest. What did my mother do? She tried to save her. She performed CPR, called for help, did everything she was trained to do. But Clara was too far gone. By the time the crash team arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. Raphael's voice was barely above a whisper. The investigation found that Elena had followed protocol. There was no negligence on her part. But there was a gap, 17 minutes between when Clara first called for help and when Elena entered her room. 17 minutes that no one could account for. Isadora felt her stomach drop. Why, where was she? That's what I needed to know. That's what I've spent 17 years trying to understand. Because those 17 minutes are the difference between an unavoidable tragedy and preventable death. And for years I believed your mother had been negligent, that she'd been on a break or distracted, or simply didn't care enough to respond quickly. Raphael finally looked at her, his eyes full of anguish. But 6 months ago I found something. A recording from the hospital's internal security system that was never included in the investigation. And everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie. What was on the recording? Raphael reached out and took her hand, his fingers cold despite the hot water. Your mother was with Clara the entire time. She never left her side. She held her hand, talked to her, called for help repeatedly. But no one came. The delay wasn't your mother's fault. It was the hospital's. They were understaffed that night, overwhelmed, and Clara's case fell through the cracks. Your mother did everything she could, but she was one person against a failing system. Isadora felt tears sliding down her face, mixing with the steam. Then why did she carry so much guilt? Why did she act like she'd done something wrong? Because she promised Clara something. In those last minutes, when Clara knew she was dying, she asked your mother to do something for her. Raphael's voice broke completely. She asked her to save the baby. She begged your mother to cut her open, to try to get the baby out before it was too late. But your mother couldn't. She wasn't a surgeon, she didn't have the authority or the tools, and even if she had, the baby was too small, too underdeveloped. It would have died anyway. Oh God, Isadora whispered. Your mother held Clara while she died, and then after, she went to the bathroom and vomited until she couldn't stand. The recording shows her sitting on the floor, sobbing, repeating, I tried, I tried, I tried. She carried that guilt for the rest of her life. Not because she failed through negligence, but because she failed to do the impossible. Raphael was crying now, tears streaming down his face, and my father knew. He watched that recording and decided it was easier to bury the truth than to admit the hospital had failed. He paid everyone off, including your mother. He made her sign an NDA and gave her enough money to disappear. And she took it because she had a young daughter to raise and no other options. The money, Isadora said slowly. The money she left us. I always wondered where it came from. Blood money, Raphael said bitterly. My father's specialty. Isadora pulled him close, wrapped her arms around him in the hot water, and they clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. She understood now why Raphael had been so obsessed, why he had tracked her down, why he had needed these 7 days. He had been looking for absolution, for understanding, for a way to make peace with a tragedy that had destroyed his entire family. I'm so sorry, she whispered into his wet hair. I'm so sorry for all of it. For Clara, for my mother, for you, for the 17 years you've spent living in this nightmare. Don't apologize. None of this is your fault. Raphael pulled back to look at her, his eyes red and raw. But there's more. Something I haven't told you yet. What? 5 years after Clara died, when I tried to kill myself in that car park, your mother was working a shift at the same hospital. She saw me. She recognized me. I don't know how. Maybe she'd seen photos in the news. Maybe she just knew. But she left her post, came outside, and saved my life. She never called for official help because she knew I didn't want to be saved. She just held me while I vomited up the pills, and then she stayed with me until I could breathe again. And before she left, she said something I've never forgotten. What did she say? She said, your sister forgives you. I know she does. Now you have to forgive yourself. Raphael's voice shook. I didn't understand then how she knew Clara was my sister. I didn't understand why she would save the brother of a girl she'd watched die. But now I do. She was trying to make amends, trying to save something when she couldn't save Clara. And I spent years hating her for failing my sister, never knowing that she's the only reason I'm still alive. Isadora felt something break open in her chest, a grief so large she thought it might swallow her whole. She thought about her mother, carrying this terrible secret, saving the life of a man who blamed her for the worst night of her life. She thought about Elena dying alone, worn down by guilt that wasn't hers to carry, never telling her daughter the truth about any of it. And she thought about Raphael, spending 17 years in the prison of his own rage and sorrow, finally understanding too late that the woman he hated most had been the one who loved him enough to let him live. She never told me, Isadora said, about any of it. She just carried it all alone. That's what parents do, Raphael said softly. They carry impossible things so their children don't have to. My father did it too in his own twisted way. He buried the truth to protect the family name, never understanding that secrets are heavier than scandals. They stayed in the water until it cooled, holding each other, crying for the people they'd lost and the years they could never get back. When they finally emerged, Raphael could barely walk. Isadora had to support most of his weight as they made their way back to the room. She helped him into a cotton yukata, her hands gentle on his ravaged body, and settled him on the futon that had been laid out for them. "I'm dying," Raphael said, and this time it was not an observation, but an acknowledgement. "Tomorrow may be the next day. I can feel it. Everything is shutting down." "Don't say that. It's true." "You know it is." He reached up and touched her face, his fingers trembling. "I'm not afraid anymore. I thought I would be, but I'm not. Because I got to know you. Because I got to fall in love with you. Because for 6 days I got to be someone other than the man who lost everything." Isadora lay down beside him, fitting herself against his fragile body. "I love you," she said. "I know I'm not supposed to. I know it breaks our agreement. But I love you, Raphael Velmont, and I'm not sorry." "I love you too," he whispered. "God help me, I do." They kissed then, soft and careful, as though they were both made of glass. And then, without words, without planning, they began to undress each other. Raphael's hands shook as he untied her robe, and Isadora had to help him, had to guide his fingers when they would not cooperate. She was not afraid. She had never done this before, had never wanted to, but with Raphael she wanted everything. She wanted to give him this last gift, this last proof that he was still alive, still capable of creating something beautiful before the end. "Are you sure?" Raphael asked, even as his body responded to hers, even as he pulled her closer. "I don't want you to do this out of pity or—" "I'm not," Isadora said firmly. "I'm doing this because I choose you, because I want this, because I want to know what it feels like to be completely yours, even if it's only for one night." Raphael groaned, a sound that was half desire, half despair. "I'm not going to last long. I'm too weak, too—" "It doesn't matter. Just be with me. That's all I want." He entered her slowly, carefully, and Isadora felt a sharp pain that blossomed into something else, something vast and overwhelming. It was not what she had imagined. It was not graceful or practiced or anything like the films suggested. It was awkward and tender and raw, their bodies learning each other in real time, making mistakes and laughing softly and trying again. Raphael was gentle with her, almost reverent, as though she was something precious he might break. And Isadora held him while he moved inside her, felt him shake apart in her arms, felt him whisper her name like a prayer as he came. Afterwards they lay tangled together, sweating despite the cold, and Raphael cried, not from sadness but from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming knowledge that he had been allowed this grace even in the shadow of death. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for giving me that, for letting me have you. You don't need to thank me. I wanted it too. I know. That's what makes it perfect." He kissed her temple. "I want you to know something. Everything I have, all of it is going to you. The house, the money, the company shares. My solicitor has already drawn up the papers. When I'm gone, you'll never have to work another day in your life." Isadora pulled back to look at him. "I don't want your money, Raphael. I know. That's exactly why you should have it." He smiled weakly. "Use it to do something good. Something Clara would have loved. Help people who need it. Build something beautiful. Just don't let it rot in accounts like I did. Promise me." "I promise. And there's one more thing." Raphael reached over to the small table beside the futon and picked up a lacquered box she hadn't noticed before. "Inside this is everything, all the answers you might still want. The full investigation report, the security footage, letters from your mother that she wrote but never sent, my father's confession, recorded before he died last year, and something I wrote for you, an explanation of everything I've done and why and how sorry I am for dragging you into my mess. Raphael, if I die, open it. Read everything. Try to understand. And if you can't forgive me, at least you'll know the truth." He pressed the box into her hands. "But if I live, if by some miracle I make it through this, then you have to forgive me first. Before you open it, can you do that?" "What are you talking about?" "You said there's no cure. You said—" "I know what I said. But doctors are wrong sometimes. Miracles happen, and I need to know that if I survive this, if I wake up tomorrow or the next day and I'm still breathing, you'll still be here. That you won't hate me for what I've put you through. Isadora clutched the box, her heart racing. Where are you going? Why does this feel like goodbye? Because it might be. Raphael pulled her close one last time, breathing in the scent of her hair. I'm going to sleep now. And when I wake up, if I wake up, I'm either going to be dying or I'm going to be healing. Either way, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I trust you, Isadora whispered, even though she didn't understand, even though terror was crawling up her spine. Good. Raphael kissed her one last time, deep and desperate. Remember that I love you. No matter what happens, no matter what you learn. I love you, Isadora Santos, and meeting you was the best thing I've done in my entire life. Then he closed his eyes, and his breathing evened out, and Isadora was left holding a box of secrets in a room that smelled of sex and mineral water and the faint sweetness of cherry blossoms. She did not sleep. She kept watch over Raphael as the night deepened, counting his breaths, checking his pulse, terrified that each moment might be his last. But dawn came, and he was still breathing. And when the sun rose fully over the mountains, painting the room golden crimson, Raphael opened his eyes. They were clear, focused, and when he spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been in days. I need to go, he said. What? Go where? Away for a little while. There's something I need to do. Someone I need to see. He was already sitting up, moving with a fluidity that seemed impossible given how broken he had been just hours ago. I can't explain right now, but I will. I promise I will. Raphael, you're not making sense. You were dying. You were... I know, but something changed. I can feel it. He cupped her face in his hands. Trust me, please, give me 24 hours, and if I don't come back to you by then, open the box. But only then. I don't understand any of this. I know, and I'm sorry. But I have to go now. He kissed her hard, then stood and began dressing in clothes Isadora didn't remember seeing before. Simple, dark, anonymous. He moved like a man who knew exactly where he was going and why, and Isadora felt the ground shifting beneath her, felt reality tilting in a direction she couldn't predict. Where are you going? She asked desperately. To pay a debt. He picked up a single blue rose from the vase on the table. Where had that come from? It hadn't been there before and tucked it into his jacket. I love you, Isadora. Don't forget that. And then he was gone, disappearing through the shoji screens like smoke, leaving Isadora alone in a room that still held the heat of his body and the echo of his words. She ran to the window, watched him walk down the gravel path and into a car that was waiting. Who had called the car? And then he was gone, vanished into the mountain morning like a ghost or a dream. Isadora stood there for a long time, clutching the lacquered box, not understanding anything. Had he been dying or not? Had his illness been real? What had changed between last night and this morning? And why did it feel like she had just been abandoned in the most profound way possible? She wanted to open the box immediately, wanted answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask. But she had promised. 24 hours, she would give him that. She would trust him, even though every instinct screamed that she had been a fool, that this had all been some elaborate game she didn't understand. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Isadora barely ate, barely moved from the room. She held the box and thought about Raphael's hands on her body, about the way he had cried after making love to her, about the strange clarity in his eyes this morning. None of it made sense. All of it hurt. 24 hours came and went. Raphael did not return. On the morning of the 8th day, one day past his supposed deadline, Isadora opened the box. Inside was a USB drive, a stack of documents, several letters in different handwriting, and a single sheet of paper with Raphael's distinctive script. Isadora, if you're reading this, I didn't come back. I'm sorry. I'm a coward and a liar, and you deserve better than this. But you also deserve the truth, so here it is. I was never dying. Not from disease, anyway. The autoimmune diagnosis was real 6 months ago, but an experimental treatment in Switzerland put it into remission. I've been in remission for 4 months. I lied to you. I lied about having 7 days. I lied about the whole premise of our journey. Why? Because I needed an excuse to do what I was too afraid to do honestly. Spend time with you, know you. fall in love with you without the complications of our real circumstances. I told myself I was giving you a gift, travel, experiences, money, but really I was giving myself permission to be someone other than Raphael Velmont, billionaire, survivor, hollow man. With you I got to be just Raphael, flawed and honest and capable of feeling again. By the time you read this, my solicitor will have contacted you. Everything I promised is yours. The money for your grandmother, a trust fund, a place to live. You don't owe me anything. You never did. What happened between us was real, even if the circumstances were built on lies. I love you. That part was never false. But I understand if you hate me. I understand if you never want to see me again. If that's the case, live well, be happy. Make something beautiful out of what I've given you. You deserve the world. And if somehow you can forgive me, if you can see past the lies to the truth underneath, then I'll be waiting. Not in Japan, not in London, but somewhere you'll know to find me. Because you know me, Isadora, better than anyone else ever has. I love you. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Isadora read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Not dying. Lied. Remission. The words kept rearranging themselves, refusing to form a coherent picture. Rage bloomed in her chest, hot and vicious. He had lied. About everything. He had manipulated her, used her grief and her poverty, and her desperate desire to save her grandmother as tools to engineer this elaborate fantasy. She had given him her virginity, her heart, her trust. And it had all been based on a lie. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the box out the window. She wanted to never think about Raphael Velmont again for as long as she lived. But beneath the rage was something else, a small stubborn voice that whispered, but it felt real. His tears were real. His love was real. And he gave you everything he promised, even though he didn't have to. Isadora spent 3 days in that mountain ryokan, reading through every document in the box. The investigation reports that showed her mother's innocence. The footage that proved Elena had done everything right. Her mother's letters, dozens of them written to Clara's family but never sent, each one begging forgiveness for failing to save her, each one carrying guilt that wasn't deserved. And Raphael's father's confession, recorded 6 months before his death, admitting to the cover-up, admitting to paying Elena to stay silent, admitting that the family had destroyed a good woman to protect their reputation. By the time Isadora left Japan, she understood. Not everything, but enough. Raphael had been broken by tragedy and had spent 17 years living in the wreckage. He had built his entire identity around loss and guilt and rage, and then he had found her, the daughter of the woman who saved him, the living proof that mercy existed even in the darkest places. He had lied to create a space where they could both be free of their histories, where they could find each other without the weight of expectation or explanation. It was manipulative. It was wrong. It was also, in its own twisted way, the most honest thing anyone had ever done for her. Isadora returned to London 2 weeks after leaving Japan. Raphael's solicitor was waiting with papers that made her head spin. She was now worth millions, had property in her name, had security she could never have imagined. Her grandmother's debts were paid, her care arranged. Isadora had been given exactly what Raphael promised, despite the lies, despite everything. But there was no word from Raphael, no letter, no contact. He had vanished as completely as he had vanished that morning in Japan. Months passed. Autumn turned to winter. Isadora moved out of her grandmother's council flat and into a modest house in Greenwich. Not one of Raphael's properties, but something she had chosen herself, paid for with money that still felt wrong in her hands. She enrolled in university, started studying nursing like her mother had, determined to do something meaningful with the unearned fortune she'd been given. She thought about Raphael every day, hated him some days, missed him every day, wondered where he was, if he was truly healthy, if he thought about her at all. She never opened the other letters he had written during their journey. She wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. And then on a warm July evening 6 months after she had last seen him, Isadora was cleaning the small house she had bought, not because she needed to, but because some habits died hard and she heard it. Music, piano music, drifting through the open windows from somewhere nearby. The melody was familiar, something she couldn't quite place. something that made her chest ache with recognition. She followed the sound outside, down the small garden path, to the gate that separated her property from the house next door, the house that had been empty since she moved in, the house that she had been told was owned by some overseas investor who never visited. The music was coming from inside. Isadora pushed open the gate and walked to the back door of the neighboring house. It was unlocked. She stepped inside, her heart hammering, following the sound of the piano through rooms that were furnished but empty of life. And then she reached the sitting room, and there he was. Raphael sat at a grand piano, his fingers moving across the keys with a grace she hadn't known he possessed. He looked different, healthier, stronger, his face no longer grey with illness. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a white shirt, and his hair had grown longer. He looked like a man who had been living quietly, rebuilding himself piece by careful piece. He didn't turn when she entered. He just kept playing, and Isadora realized what the melody was. It was the song her mother used to hum, the Portuguese lullaby that Elena had sung to her when she was small. How did he know it? How did he— Your mother sang it to Clara, Raphael said quietly, still playing, the night she died. I found a recording in the hospital files. She held Clara and sang to her, trying to calm her while they waited for help that didn't come fast enough. It's been in my head ever since I heard it. I couldn't let it go. Isadora felt tears streaming down her face. You've been here the whole time. Next door. For 3 months. I bought this house 6 months ago before we left for Iceland. I hoped you might choose to stay in London. I wanted to be close, but only if you wanted me to be. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of everything he couldn't say. I'm sorry, Isadora. For lying, for manipulating, for being too broken to just tell you the truth from the beginning. I'm sorry. Why? She asked. Why all the lies? Why couldn't you just— Because I didn't think you'd choose me if you knew the truth. That I was just a damaged man looking for absolution. That I had tracked you down because of your mother. Because I was obsessed with understanding a tragedy that would never make sense. That I wanted to know you not because of who you are, but because of what you represent. He stood from the piano, moving toward her slowly, as though she might bolt. But then I did know you. And you were so much more than I expected. You were brave and kind and real in ways I haven't been real in years. And I fell in love with you. Not the idea of you. Not the daughter of Elena Santos. Just you, Isadora. You should have told me. I know. You let me think you were dying. You let me give myself to you believing it was the last time. I know. His voice broke. It was unforgivable. I know that. But I can't regret it, because those days with you, they were the only honest days I've had in 17 years. Even built on lies, they were true. We were true. Isadora wanted to stay angry, wanted to walk away and never look back. But she thought about her mother, carrying impossible guilt alone. She thought about Clara dying too young with no one to blame. She thought about Raphael, spending 17 years in prison of his own making, finally finding a way to break free. And she thought about herself, how she had lived small and scared and safe, never taking up space, never asking for more, until Raphael had given her 7 days to be someone different, someone brave enough to love without guarantees. I don't forgive you, she said carefully. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Raphael nodded, accepting this. I understand. But I don't hate you either. And I think I still love you. Even though I shouldn't. Even though you're a manipulative bastard who lied about dying to trick me into falling for you. A small, cautious smile touched Raphael's mouth. That's fair. So here's what's going to happen, Isadora said, stepping closer. You're going to court me properly. No lies, no games, no manufactured urgency. You're going to take me on dates and meet my grandmother, and let me know you, the real you, not the dying man or the broken heir or whatever other mask you wear. And if after all that I still love you and you still love me, then maybe we can try this for real. I'll do anything you want, Raphael said. I'll wait as long as you need. I'll prove to you every day that you're worth more than any fortune I could give you. Good. Isadora reached out and took his hand. And you're going to teach me to play piano. My mother always wanted me to learn, but we could never afford lessons. I'd be honored. They stood there in the quiet house, holding hands, the last light of summer streaming through the windows. It was not the ending either of them had imagined. It was not perfect or neat or resolved, but it was real. And that was enough. Raphael, Isadora said softly. Yes? Play it again. My mother's song. I want to remember it properly. So Raphael sat back down at the piano, and Isadora settled beside him on the bench, and he played the Portuguese lullaby while the sun set over London. And for the first time in years for both of them, the music didn't sound like grief. It sounded like forgiveness, like possibility, like the beginning of something neither of them would have to face alone. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent and eternal. But inside the quiet house in Greenwich, two people who had been broken by the same tragedy finally found a way to be whole. Not by forgetting the past or erasing the pain, but by choosing, day after difficult day, to build something new from the wreckage. It would take time. It would take work. It would take honesty and patience and grace. But they had time now, all the time in the world, and that in the end was the greatest gift they could give each other.